Alright, let's take a look at the 2018 New Orleans Saints off-season. I'll tell you what, the 2017 New Orleans Saints off-season was ridiculous. I mean, it was just off the charts. They made so many good moves, particularly in the draft, that the Saints turned around and had an incredible season last year. So can they repeat it in 2018 and then get them over that hump so they can get that second Super Bowl victory? First, let's take a look at their cap space and see how much cap space did they have to work with. Well, at the beginning of the offseason, they had about $32 million in cap space. That's a decent amount of money to work with, except for the fact that it didn't include Drew Brees because Drew Brees was a free agent. So as you can imagine, they did not in reality have so much cap space to work with. By the end of free agency, they had, August, by the start of the preseason, they had $4.6 million in cap space. So let's see, they didn't have a ton of money to be working with once they signed Drew Brees. So let's see, what did they do? Well, first I want to look at some possible cuts. Okay, who were some guys that I thought were guys that might not be on the roster next year that were on the roster last year? Well, Coby Fleener is one of them. Okay, Coby Fleener was a free agent acquisition in the 2016 offseason. He had a good year in 2016, but cutting him saved a few $1 million, and he had some concussion issues. There were 3 years left on his deal, quite a bit of dead money, and $3.4 million of his salary was already guaranteed. So, but, given his injury issues, given the fact that he only had 295 yards last season, the Saints decided to move on. Another guy was Michael Hoomanawanui, and he was another tight end that I thought might get cut. He was in the final year of his deal. It would save $1.6 million. He hadn't had 100 yards, even 100 yards receiving since 2013. He never had 150 yards receiving. So I thought, well, Hoomanawanui, he might be gone, but so far they've decided to hold on to him. Hau'oloi Kikaha is another guy, another Hawaiian or Samoan. I'm honestly not sure exactly where he's from. He is a defensive end who I thought might get cut. He was in the final year of his rookie deal after being drafted in the second round. When you drafted in the second round, that final year of your rookie deal, you have a decent salary, $1.1 million in this case, and he just hasn't been the same since before he missed the 2016 season with the third injury to his left ACL. He already had an ACL injury to his left ACL twice in college. He had a third ACL tear in 2016. And then last year, he had, 10 tackles? But he did have 4 sacks, which is not bad. Maybe they were bringing him back slowly. I don't know. I thought he was the guy, Kikaha, that might get cut to save $1.1 million. But so far, it looks like they're going to give him a chance to come back for that final year of the rookie deal. Now let's look at the guys who are unrestricted free agents for the Saints. Drew Brees was an unrestricted free agent. You can see his numbers there. He had 5 years with 5,000 yards passing. It's ridiculous. Last year, you can see his numbers dropped to 4,300 yards receiving and down to 23 touchdowns. But here's the deal. As all Saints fans know, that probably isn't a reflection of Drew Brees, like, dropping off the cliff. Although, how can you call 43 touchdowns, 4,300 yards, 23 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, dropping off a cliff? But it's probably not a decline in Drew Brees as much as a renewed running game. To have Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara back there, you just don't need to throw the ball 5,000 yards. You shouldn't throw the ball 5,000 yards. It'd be crazy to throw the ball 5,000. So, he still completed 72% of his passes, which was actually a career high. It's just amazing. For a guy who's going to be 39 years old. Anyway, Drew Brees signed a 2-year, $50 million deal. So the future first ballot Hall of Famer will be back next season. On the defensive side of the ball, who were the more important unrestricted free agents? Alex Okafor. Okay? You can see in 2014 had 8 sacks with the Cardinals, 30 tackles. His sacks fell off the next year, but still had 31 tackles. Then the last year with Arizona had only 13 tackles. And then in 2017, he comes over to New Orleans, plays in 10 games, has 43 tackles and 4.5 sacks, was playing very, very well. And then he tore his Achilles. So, that's sad. I feel bad for him. He was playing on a 1-year, $2 million deal, but New Orleans decided to go ahead and give him a 2-year, $6.78 million deal. They saw enough to say, hey, look, this guy's looking maybe at the peak of his career. Let's go ahead and sign him to a 2-year deal. And if he comes back at full health, it's not easy to come off a torn Achilles, but guys have done it. And if he can do it, that'll be a great value deal for the Saints. But it's a big if. It's a big if. Also, at defensive end, George Johnson was a free agent. He had 2.5 sacks in 3 games. He came in at the end of the season after being waived by the Lions. He had missed all of 2016 with the Bucks because of a hip fracture. He played last year on a 1-year, $775,000 deal, and the Saints are going to bring him back for 1 year and $1 million. The last kind of important free agent for the Saints was Kenny Vaccaro. He was solid but inconsistent. Really was the 3rd best safety on the roster. Not as consistent as maybe Marcus Williams or Von Bell. But he did play almost 2/3 of the defensive snaps. So, to lose a guy that got that many snaps, it is a loss. He was a first-round pick originally that was playing on his 5th-year option. He was actually unsigned until very, very recently. And then the Titans lost their starting safety, Cyprian, and so they decided to go ahead and sign Kenny Vaccaro. But he won't be a Saint next season. Michael Maudie is another guy, a linebacker. He was a backup and a special teams player. He played on a 1-year, $775,000 deal. He won't be back, but they did bring in another linebacker, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then also at safety, Raphael Bush, longtime Saints player. He'll be 31 next year. He was a backup, had 23 tackles last year. Saints had given him $885,000. He's going to be a year older, and Buffalo decided to give him 2 years and $3.5 million. So that's interesting. Somehow he played himself into a raise as a backup. Let's summarize these changes on the Saints roster. Chase Daniel is out. He went to Chicago to be the backup there. And so Tom Savage came in to back up Drew Brees. At running back, Mark Ingram will be suspended for the first 4 games. So they brought in Terrence West, Shane Vereen, and drafted Boston Scott in the 6th round. Here's the Terrence West numbers are there below. He had a big 2016, 774 yards, 4 yards a carry, 236 yards receiving. Last year, numbers dropped off, had 138 yards rushing, 3.5 yards a carry. I think that's a decent move to try to bring in some depth there with Mark Ingram out. Shane Vereen, I don't get that at all. And in fact, I don't know. I think he's just there to have some bodies in training camp, but we'll see. At wide receiver, Willie Snead is out. He was number 4 wide receiver. You can see he had huge numbers in 2015 and 2016, but then last year only had 8 catches in 11 games. So Willie Snead is out, but they brought in Cameron Meredith. That will be interesting. He had a big 2016 season in Chicago, but missed last year with a torn ACL. So how is he able to bounce back? Saints gave him, a fairly decent contract. They also drafted Traquan Smith in the 3rd round, and then also brought in Josh Huff, who didn't play last year. Josh Huff, you don't anticipate being a difference maker. But, keep an eye on Traquan Smith and then Cameron Meredith and see how they can improve the depth there at wide receiver. At tight end, Kobe Fleener was out, like I mentioned, season-ending concussion. And Benjamin Watson is in. There's Benjamin Watson's numbers. Had played with New Orleans before. Had big numbers. 825 yards and 6 touchdowns. And the guy's 38. He's going to be 38 years old next season, but last year he still had 522 yards and led the Baltimore Ravens in receptions with 61. So probably an upgrade for the Saints, at least holding steady there. At tackle, Zach Streep is gone. He retired. And but he probably lost his starting job anyway. Rick Leonard is in, and Michael Ola is in. So Rick Leonard was drafted in the 4th round, and then Michael Ola was a reserve player brought in for depth. At guard, Sinio Kelemeti is in. I think that's out. I apologize. He's out. He was the number 3 guard there in New Orleans, but he was great. He was probably one of the best. There was Andrew Norwell, who was a free agent player picked up by the Jags. He was originally with Carolina. That was the best guard available in free agency. I think Sinio Kelemeti was one of the maybe number 2, number 3, not a starter, but he was like the guy that anybody who was looking for a value guard. You look for those guys who were backups, who killed it as a backup, and that's your guy. So that's a big loss for the Saints to lose Kelemeti. But Jermon Bush is in. That is not anywhere near as good as Sinio was. Jermon Bush was a starter last year with Miami, but he was really bad. So, the depth there for the interior offensive line took a hit for the Saints. And then Andrew Tiller was also brought in to provide some depth. But, look, Kelemeti wasn't a starter in New Orleans, but he stepped in when guys got hurt, and he played great. So that is somewhat of a loss there. At center, the Saints drafted Will Clapp in the 7th round. Now, this is an interesting move. The Saints traded up, and they traded this year's first-round pick and next year's first-round pick to trade up for Marcus Davenport. I don't know. Here's a guy with a lot of potential who hasn't played against top talent. We'll see. We'll see. The Saints really believe this guy can be a huge pass rusher. And if he can, then hey, they crushed it out of the park again. And last year they made all the right moves. Drafting Kamara, drafting that tackle, drafting the starting corner. So everything they did last year was right. But this is a risky move for a guy who hasn't played against, he wasn't a guy who played for like Alabama. I think he played for UTSA. He just not a guy who's played top competition. And it's going to be a big adjustment to the NFL. But if he can develop, it's not easy to find big-time pass rushers. He's got a lot of talent, a lot of physical ability. Defensive tackle John Hughes is out. He was a reserve defensive tackle, and the Saints signed Jay Bromley. I think that's an upgrade. He finished his rookie contract, had 21 tackles last season. I think that's a good move. Good move by the Saints to improve the interior defensive line, the depth there. At linebacker, another upgrade for the Saints. They lost a couple of reserve players, just backup guys, depth players, Jonathan Freeney, Michael Maudie. But they brought in Demario Davis. Now, in the short run, in the first year of this deal, I think this is a great deal. In the sense that Demario Davis is going to step in right away and be a player. Okay, you can see his numbers there on the right of the screen. Best year of his career last season, 135 tackles, 5 sacks, 9 tackles for a loss. It's a really big move, great move. But they gave him a lot of money. They gave him a big contract, and he's already like 29 years old. We'll see how this pans out over the long term. But in the short term, I think it's a great move for the Saints. It's really going to improve their linebacker core. Really improve their defense. They also brought in Jaron Elliott, but he's more of a reserve depth player. But, also big news, Nate Stupar and Alex Anzalone will both be back. Stupar tore his ACL in week 6. Anzalone was a third-round pick who went out with a shoulder injury in week 4. They also have Manti Te'o. The Saints should have a really good linebackers this season. Really strong linebackers. And it'll be interesting to see if they even keep them all, or if they cut someone or trade someone. But Saints should definitely have improved at linebacker. At cornerback, Sterling Moore is out, as well as Delvin Breaux. Delvin Breaux had a really great rookie year, but then has struggled with injuries. Had a broken fibula and a shoulder injury in 2016. And then last year he had that misdiagnosed fractured fibula where the doctors didn't initially get the diagnosis right, which cost them their job. Sterling Moore started in 2016 for New Orleans, but last year was a reserve. So those guys will be out. In comes Patrick Robinson, and then Cameron Moore, who was drafted in the 6th round. Cameron Moore, we'll see. He's not going to be a guy who's going to play right away. They'll see if they can develop him over time. But I think, Patrick Robinson is a really, really interesting one because he had been in New Orleans before and did not play very well at all. Had a career season with Philadelphia playing in the nickel spot. And the Saints decided, hey, it didn't work out the first time, but let's give it a second chance. All right? And they gave him a 4-year, $20 million deal. So, for me, I think for a lot of people, that was quite surprising. Because, for one, not only did it not really work out very well the first time that he was on the Saints roster, and Patrick Robinson didn't play very well, but in addition to that, Patrick Robinson had a great season last year, but he's about to turn 31 years old. Actually, he and I have the same birthday, except I'm even older than he is. But So you're signing a 31-year-old corner who really had one great season to a 4-year, $20-something million deal. That is an interesting move. Once again, if the 2 seasons prior, Patrick Robinson had 1 interception and 0 interceptions, and then 8 passes defended and 5 passes defended. So, last year he had 4 interceptions and 18 passes defended. So he had a huge year last year at playing in the nickel. I get it. 31-year-old corner, though, 4 years and 20 some odd million dollars. I just don't know. Is that going to end up being a good deal for the Saints? We'll have to see. At safety, Kenny Vaccaro is out. He was more or less a starter last season. He's a versatile guy. He played about 2/3 of the snaps, but the Saints already have a couple of guys who, frankly, are probably better than him at safety. They also let Raphael Bush go. He was going to be a free agent, and they decided not to bring him back. And instead, they brought in Kurt Coleman, who is 30 years old, and he had 7 interceptions back in 2015, but you can see his numbers have dropped off, had 4 in 2016 and 0 last year, has really struggled in coverage. So I think, that probably is not an upgrade. It's probably a downgrade. And they also drafted Trell Jamerson in the 5th round and brought in Sherrod Niesman. So overall, I'd say the Saints had a pretty good offseason. They definitely upgraded at linebacker. Maybe they upgraded at corner, depending on how Patrick Robinson does now that he got paid. But linebacker's an upgrade. Defensive tackle, I think they have better depth this year. At defensive end, that's the big question mark. How will Marcus Davenport do? And I think that they also improved at wide receiver. So overall, I think the Saints should have a slightly improved offense, and their offense was incredible last season. A little bit less depth on that interior offensive line. And then a definitely upgraded linebacker core from last season. A slightly better defensive line, an upgraded defensive line. If Okafor is healthy. Maybe slightly better cornerback, maybe not maybe a drop back in safety. So I think the Saints should be even better this season than they were last season. So, the Saints are going to be a hell of a team this year. And the question is, how are they going to do in that division against the Atlanta Falcons? Because those are the 2 teams that look like they can win the division. And it should be an exciting season. I think there's no way the Saints don't make the playoffs. That's impossible. I just can't imagine a scenario unless Drew Brees got hurt. Knock on wood. But if Drew Brees stays healthy, I don't see any way the Saints don't make the playoffs. And in fact, I think they're one of 5 teams that have the best shot of winning the NFC. You got the Vikings, the Eagles, the Rams, the Saints, and the Falcons. Those are the 5 teams that by far have the best chance of winning the NFC. And I don't think anyone else really has a chance. So if you like this video, please click subscribe, because we are going to have some of the best coverage of the NFL on YouTube. At the end of the preseason, we're going to break down the final rosters of all 32 teams. And then each week, we're going to preview the upcoming week's games. And then we're going to review the previous week's games. So make sure you click subscribe, because there are going to be some amazing videos about the NFL in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.